Hello, and welcome to Solving for the Undefined podcast. I'm your host, Johanna, founder of Miss Kuiper's Classroom, the place that equips teachers and parents in helping students struggling with on-grade level math. But it's not always about the numbers, and that's why I'm here, bringing you the formulas to solve your problems, math and otherwise, and helping students gain confidence in academic abilities. And that's what you can count on. Hello, happy new week, happy Monday. I hope your week starts off strong. Back on February 20th, I was a guest on Pretty Sure Podcast, whose host is Sabrina, and we were talking about my first year as a teacher. And I feel like most teachers in their first year have rough years because you're taking all of these things that you've learned in your schooling and in your student teaching and trying to implement them in a classroom that is your own. And while that's also super exciting, it can be a huge challenge. During my first year of teaching, the one thing I struggled with the most is classroom management. Classroom management is a tough thing for teachers to master in general, at least in my personal opinion. But it's also the one thing that will glue a class together or make it fall apart. During my first year of teaching, especially near the beginning of the school year in September and October, I was having a rough time. I specifically remember a single day during my 7th period. Oh boy, did that 7th period test me every single day. I had students talking out of turn, interrupting, not doing work. It was a literal nightmare. I remember this one specific time. I told them to stop talking. Like, I got angry and I yelled at them because at that point I was done and I didn't know what else to do. And so I threatened them with a test. Because that's what all good teachers do, right? You threaten them with a test if they're not good, because what student wants to take a test? And so I was like, be quiet or I'm going to give you a test. And one of the students in the back was like, bet. And so I did. I gave them a test on adding and subtracting integers, which is technically a 7th grade standard, and I'm an 8th grade teacher. But you know, a test is a test, and it's what I had on hand. And I got to follow through, right? If you don't follow through, then you're really in trouble. Another thing to note is in my school district, teachers within their first 3 years of teaching get a mentor. And my mentor, I don't think I would have survived my first year the way I had without my mentor. She was the best thing that happened my first year of teaching. She would come and observe my classroom. We would plan lessons together. We would talk about how to better my classroom management, not only for my students, but for my mental health as a teacher, to prevent burnout, to prevent me from hating being a teacher, and overall to just be a better teacher for my students. And my mentor introduced me to this concept of classroom management called ENVoY. That's ENVoY. It stands for Educational Nonverbal Yardsticks. The O is there because if it wasn't, it'd be envy, and that's not a very good classroom management style name. ENVoY it was. And ENVoY is also a messenger or representative that goes between countries or groups of people. They are specifically used in a diplomatic sense, so it's perfect for classroom management. I had learned this ENVoY classroom management technique by Michael Grinder back when I was in college. It's very big in our school district. I don't know how many other people outside of our school district know what ENVoY is. ENVoY is one book within a 3-part series by Michael Grinder. There's ENVoY, Cat in a Doghouse, and A Healthy Classroom. And each of those relate to a different portion of being in a classroom, whether it's relationships, individual student relationships and classroom management, or creating a conducive, a healthy environment for students to be in. So ENVoY is a detailing of the patterns of excellence in educational nonverbal management, meaning it's not an invention, but a noticing. And Michael Grinder, what he did was he went and observed teachers all around the country, studying what they did and what worked in their classroom.
And so his books and his management style is just a combination of what he's seen other teachers do, put a label on it, and then taught other teachers how to use it. And most of the strategies are all nonverbal because 93% of all communication is nonverbal. Well, technically 70 to 93% depending on who you ask, but still that is a huge portion of our communication being conveyed through inflection, body language, our breathing, how we stand, how we hold our hands. There are so many pieces to nonverbal communication, and it represents more than our verbal communication, which blows my mind. I was trying to control my classroom using my words, but 70 to 93% of all communication is conveyed nonverbally. Even though I learned about ENVoY back in college, because I had no context in which to use it, it wasn't something that I used right away. So a brief introduction to ENVoY, it's all about nonverbal communication. And ENVoY works best once you've established relationships with students because ENVoY works with 80% of the students 80% of the time. So keeping that in mind as we go forward talking about some of the main things that I love about ENVoY. Also, a little disclaimer, ENVoY itself, the one part of the 3-book series, is like a 7 or 8 day class that teachers can take in our school district, and it's like every Thursday or every other Thursday. So keep that in mind as I give you a 20-minute snippet of what ENVoY is. ENVoY revolves around the idea that on an average day, you are transitioning between a couple of things. Between teaching, you transition to seat work, you do seat work, and then you have to get their attention. And this is just a cycle of what happens every day within your classroom. And some days it's a little bit harder because of outside influences, like if it's potentially going to snow or it's Valentine's Day. Things like that make classroom management harder. Within ENVoY, there are 7 gems. I don't know what gems stand for besides being like the most important things. 7 gems that in our district we teach teachers to master first before moving into the finessing of classroom management. So the 7 gems, I'll read them to you what their names are. I think also Michael Grinder has a YouTube channel where you can search these. I will link that in the blog post on my website, MissKuipersClassroom.com. Click on podcast, and it should be the latest post for that, and you can see all of the different links for it. The 7 gems of ENVoY are freeze body, above pause whisper, raise your hand, exit directions, most important 20 seconds, off neutral on, and influence approach. But today I'm only going to be talking about above pause whisper, exit directions, and the most important 20 seconds. First off, we have above pause whisper. Above pause whisper is getting students' attention and maintaining their focus while you're getting their attention. The first part of above pause whisper is the above part. This is getting your students' attention above the volume of the class. So if your students are collaborating and working together or they're off task and talking, a short syllable like class above their volume level and getting their attention that way. Or in my classroom when we were in person, I would use a bell. So one of those that you would see at a front desk somewhere that you would tap. That was how I would get my class's attention. That was my above. And then after you get their attention, you're going to pause, you're going to wait. And then after 3 or 4 seconds, according to the book, you're going to call the names of the students who are not yet focused. And then you're going to drop your voice and whisper or stair step your voice down. So here would be an example. My class is talking, they're collaborating, and I want to bring them back together. So I would go, class, pausing. And after 3 seconds, the students who are not yet ready, I'll whisper their names, Jonah, Isaac. Then I'll pause again. And once I have 100% attention, yes, 100% attention, I'll say in a whisper voice, thank you. I'll pause one more time, and then I will move and talk about what I wanted to say. This is research-based ideas that work for 80% of the students 80% of the time. So Michael Grinder went around to teachers' classrooms across America, looked at what worked, what didn't work, and labeled it. So you may already be doing this in your classroom, but it just didn't have a label. So there you go, above, pause, whisper. Next we have is exit directions. This one for me I found works really well also in virtual learning, whereas above, pause, whisper might work best in an in-person scenario. Doesn't mean it doesn't work online, but exit directions are where I found the most success using my nonverbal communication in my virtual classroom. I talked about exit directions back in episode 4, 5 ideas to increase student engagement. So you might remember this and that's okay, but it's always good to learn something more than once to solidify it in our brains. Or at least that's what I tell my students. And I believe it too. But moving forward, exit directions are a piece of nonverbal communication that creates independence in our students. So when I release students to do an activity, whether it's a turn and talk, a warm-up problem, a time to do seat work, basically giving them an activity and I want them to work on it, I put up on my screen exit directions. In these exit directions, I tell them what they're doing, how to do it, where to do it, and what to do when they're done. And I'll also post like a picture of whatever they're working on, whether it's a specific problem or an activity or they're on a website doing an activity. In the what to do category, I'll put specifically what the task is. If I want my students to be on Desmos.com working on the marble slides activity, I'm going to put on Desmos, work on marble slides activity. In the how to do it, I'm going to put what materials they should be using. So if they can use a calculator, I'll say with a calculator. If they need to work on their own or with a partner or with their team, I'll put that there as well. And in the where to do it, I'll put if they're supposed to be in their own seat or if they're allowed to move around and be in a different place. Also put the location of the activity. So if we're working on an iReady assignment, I'll say go to clever.com, sign with Google, click on iReady. Or if we're in our math book, I'll say on page 64 and I'll put the little symbol of our math book. And then lastly, what I think is one of the most important pieces is what to do when you're finished. Because how many times have you had a student say, what do I do when I'm done? This eliminates that. In the finished section, you'll put where you want the student to put the activity when it's done. So if a student is working on a paper activity, if you want them to put it in their turn-in folder, put it in their binder, something. And what to do after that. They've turned it in wherever you specified, whether it's online, in person. And then what to do next. So I'll usually put work on your homework, work on your MyPath minutes, or read quietly, something to give students direction to do when they're done. Exit directions create an independent student and save you from repeating the directions multiple times. One thing to note with exit directions is if you have the exit directions on the board or the screen, if you're writing them or if you have slides, if a student asks you what you're doing, and you respond with, oh, we're doing this, 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 and this, your exit directions are now worthless. You have just taken the nonverbal communication and made it verbal. Now your student is relying on you rather than being independent and reading the directions. If a student asks you, Ms. Kuiper, what are we doing? You're going to point to the screen and have them read it. Or you can say, oh, let's look here, and have the student read it to you. Or you can say, what does the board say? Things along those lines. Because this creates an independent learner and now they know next time where to look. I will post an example of my exit directions in the show notes on my website. Lastly, we have the most important 20 seconds, or MITS. This is helping students transition from the teaching portion into their independent time and seat work. If you were to watch a teacher do MITS, it would look like they were standing still for 20 or more seconds, just staring at their class doing work. That's what it would look like. However, it's more than just standing and watching. It goes really well with exit directions as well. The first part of MITS is to stand next to your directions and share the directions with the students. Then you're going to ask, what questions do you have? And then as students ask those questions, you're going to write that pertinent information. If it isn't already on your exit directions, you're going to write that down Because if other students have that question, you can now refer them back to the exit directions rather than verbally explaining to them again what the answer is. And then you're going to release the students. Now you're going to be very specific in how you release the students. For me personally, I say, all right, go ahead and begin. That is telling students now is the time for them to start, rather than ambiguously handing out papers and being like, all right. It gives students specific instructions like, now is time to begin. All right, let's get started. And then MITS comes into play. Now, like its name, most important 20 seconds. This is the time where students are going to struggle the most in getting started. So wherever you are standing, giving those directions after you say, go ahead and begin, you're going to stand, not moving, watching your students, scanning the room, waiting to see every student on task. And there are some days that MITS will take longer than 20 seconds. I think for the beginning of the year or right after the break, it'll take 40 seconds, sometimes a minute, but you staying stationary is helping students get started because they know you're watching. One thing that I struggled with the most in this most important 20 seconds is students have questions while you're doing your most important 20 seconds. You can hand gesture and say, like, mouth, not now, or one moment. Like, I'll do this a lot. Like, I'll point up one finger and go like, mouth, one moment to students, and they'll be like, oh, right. And then I mentally note which students asked in what order, and then as soon as my MITS is done, I'll proceed to those students and go in that order. After 100% of your students are on task, then you release yourself and you go to the students who have asked for help. Or if no one has, you go then to circulate your classroom to be present for your students. If you cannot get a specific student on task using the MITS technique, one thing that you can do is call that student's name, not as an above, but gently calling out Isabel. And then gesturing what you want them to do, whether it's they need to be writing, so you imitate what writing looks like, or you point back to your exit directions, and then gesture for them to get started. So like a go ahead and begin sign, or say go ahead and begin. But then you need to do your MITS over, because you've just broken the silence, you've just broken students' concentration, and you need to do that most important 20 seconds again. It may seem excessive, but believe me, as an unbeliever my first year of teaching to where I am now, oh boy, does this work. It's also a time for you to relax, where you can calm your breathing again, just watching your students work before going and diving into answering questions, being present, circulating, giving positive reinforcement, all of that. The 3 things that we've covered today in terms of classroom management nonverbally from Michael Grinder are above, pause, whisper, exit directions, and most important 20 seconds. And last note to you, remember, classroom management is not something you can master in one night. This takes time, it takes practice, it also takes a while to see what works with your students. Sometimes you'll get to do MITS in 20 seconds. Other classes, you will have to stand there for a minute, and that's okay. Every class is going to be different. Some classes you'll have to do less classroom management. Some classes you'll have to do more. It's just finding that perfect sweet spot for each class and knowing that's the teacher they need to function well to learn the best. If you've tried out any of these techniques that you've learned today, please shoot me a message on Instagram or email me. I'd love to know how you've used it and how it's worked in your classroom, whether you knew it before or it's brand new to you. So let me know what you do in your classroom and how you use it. Have a fantastic week.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. To find all the links and resources to things talked about in this episode, head on over to MissKuipersClassroom.com and click on podcast. And until next time, I'll leave you with this.
Did you hear about the overeducated circle? It has 360 degrees.